Welcome to Moments with Marianne. Allow me to interrupt your train of thought with something that may be one of the most interesting things you hear today. This is Marianne Pastana, and we're here today with two special guests. Our first guest today is David Richman, and he's here to share with us his new book, Cycle of Lives: 15 People's Stories, 5,000 Miles, and a Journey Through the Emotional Chaos of Cancer. So let's welcome to the show, David Richman.
Thank you, Marianne. Very happy to talk to you.
You know, what an honor it is to talk with you, especially about this book. Why did you decide now was the right time to write it?
Well, now was the right time to write it only because it happened when it happened. But boy, did it come out at the right time, because the world is a little bit more open to the discussions around the emotional sides of trauma than we were just a few years ago. And although the book deals with, different types of traumas than we've all experienced in the last couple of years, it just is a conversation that is so much easier to have in today's world. It's the demand for people to have some tools and some explanations for how to deal with the emotional sides of their trauma has increased so dramatically that I'm just so happy that the book came out when it did, because it's touching a lot of people.
Well, I'm really glad it did at the same time as well, because, a lot of people are faced with either they know someone who's gone through cancer, they're facing it themselves, but it really has us questioning our own mortality. And also, are we living our best lives in many ways?
Yeah, and that's the saying, hey, we've all been touched by cancer is really is true, but we don't really get deeply into the emotional side of it often, even when it's close to us. Maybe we don't talk to the people that are closest to us about it, the emotional side of it, because we feel guilty, or we don't want to bring them down, or we're ashamed, or we don't want to show weakness or whatever. But we really don't let kind of people out of the closest part of our inner circle into the emotional side of it. Like, we're there to rally for our coworkers, we're there to rally for our friends, but gosh, when it comes to the difficult, talks about the emotional side, it's easier to, I like to say it's easier to drop a casserole off than to say, how are you feeling? And so what brought me to want to do this book was that thought, Marianne, that people are way more equipped to deal with the tasks about cancer. If it's a doctor, patient, loved one, whatever, they can, how do I get my kids watched while I go to chemo? How do I navigate time off of work? How do I eat better? Those kind of things they're good about. But what they're not real good about is talking about the emotional side, and especially because of traumas that were present earlier in our lives that affect our ability to connect, or more often not connect at a deep level with people. That's what I wanted to explore.
Do you find that lack of being able to connect is maybe a generational thing, as opposed to maybe like some of the younger generations are a little bit more open to talking about their feelings?
Yeah, I went into that thinking it for sure, but I was wrong. One of the common themes, because I talked to a lot of people, about, but very deep about their experiences. And one of the things that was very prevalent, I'm not going to say it was in every case, Marianne, and certainly not, at the depth of, the deepest depths in every case, but isolation, self-isolation, abandonment, kind of being an outcast, even if not on purpose, but just we just want to keep an arm's distance away from kind of the emotional side. Didn't matter, young, old, middle, in between. It was more the traumas that people had. Like, for example, Marianne, I had this young gentleman that I spoke to. He made the book, and wonderful, wonderful guy. And he was just not, he just didn't want to accept help. And so if you would have asked anybody about, and he went through a cancer he should not have survived. If you asked anybody that knew him, including those closest to him, they would have had no idea the depth of what he was going through, because he didn't want to let them in to show vulnerability. He didn't want to let them know that he needed them because he was afraid they were going to abandon him. Right. And he was a young, vibrant guy. And so I don't think it's age related as much as it is um, probably based on our fears of being abandoned or our fears of showing weakness or, those type of things. And that's a little bit prevalent in all of us, I think.
Do you find that people sometimes just don't know how to act, what to say, how to support? And so the dropping off the casserole and taking off is kind of where they kind of stop at?
Oh man, I mean, tell me you don't know that. That's absolutely a truth, right? Anybody listening, I mean, how many people do you know? And this is not a judgment because I know a couple right now that are in, a dark place or, maybe need some help. And I haven't reached out to them because I don't know what the heck to say. Right. And it's easy because, you don't want to step on their toes. You don't want to cross any boundaries. You don't want to say something stupid. My sister was dying of cancer, Marianne, and I picked up the phone one time because I saw her calling me and I go, "Hey, what's happening, June? How you feeling?" And I'm like, "Oh, that was the stupidest question in the world. What do you mean? How's she feeling? She's dying. I mean, like, what the heck?" Right. And I'm beating myself up mentally. And she goes, "Oh, I'm fine, whatever." And then I went, "Oh, so it's okay to ask her how she's feeling?" Like, I mean, it's just, it's such a multifaceted, difficult place to go to kind of say like, "Oh my God, I don't want to say the wrong thing," especially when you care about people. So you're probably even more guarded when you're really talking to people you care about because you don't want to cross a line. You don't want to say something stupid. You don't want to make them feel bad or make them feel guilty or brag about how great your life is when theirs is terrible right now.
Were there a lot of things you learned as far as communication goes with June that really kind of opened up your life?
Yeah, that's the joy of doing the project that I did. So I just sought, Marianne, I sought out all these different types of people, age, different types of cancer, whether they were a doctor, a professional, a caregiver, a survivor, a loved one. And I also sought out people who had just crazy range of traumas in their lives, kind of things that we all have, and also people that had a range of emotional responses to the cancer and their cancer experiences. And what I learned when talking to them, and I talked to them for maybe up to about 2.5 years before I ever started to sit down to write the books. I wanted to make the stories as deep and authentic as possible. Is I learned that there's so many facets of proper communication with people that are going through difficult times. There's so much behind, Marianne, the thought that you don't know what people are going through or what they have gone through. And that is, if you take the time, and it does take time, if you take the time to give somebody a safe space to be able to process that thought of what they've been through or what they are going through, you give them a safe space to talk and to explore with them what's going on an emotional level in relation to the traumas that they've had, and you show a caring, authentic way of listening and entering a real authentic heart to heart dialogue, which is really difficult to do, and it certainly can't be done in short order. Then you really open up kind of the depths of how we can communicate with each other. I know that's a complicated answer, but I learned over a long period of time when talking to all these different people that that finding a safe space just is just the beginning of the road to having a deep conversation and bonding with somebody on a really authentic level.
There's so much to consider, and is it kind of like different for everybody?
Yeah, it totally is. I mean, it's funny when you just said different. I was thinking, what was the same? The same was every person said, nobody's interested in my story, and my story's only, well, it's just my life. Nobody's interested. And it's like, wow, their stories are so interesting, but yeah, it's so different because when you think about it, people have been through things that we just have no idea about, right? Somebody's listening right now who has just gone through the most traumatic thing ever, but they don't really have the need, the space to talk about it. There's just hasn't been the reason for them to let people around them know, or they're dealing with something that they've suppressed for a long time and it's just starting to bubble up and they don't know how to deal. I mean, people are going through so much and or have gone through so much, and how we learn how to communicate with them in a way that will allow us to form deeper, more heart-centered connections is just, there's no formula to it. There's just a kind of allowing yourself to make mistakes, allowing yourself to say the wrong thing. And if you're trying to communicate with people in order to form a deeper connection, you just have to try, whatever way might work. It took me, Marianne, sometimes it took me 6 months of talking to somebody before they told me something that was germane to who they were as a person. I was talking to one gentleman, as an example, who had such a fear of abandonment that I couldn't make sense of it. And I'd go, listen, man, if you don't tell me more, I can't understand how to explain where you're at. And he goes, okay, fine. I'm going to tell you something I never told anybody. And this was 6 months into knowing him, Marianne. He said, yeah, when I was a young boy, I walked in and my mom had killed herself. I found her. And I'm like, what the heck? I knew everything about this guy through 6 months of talking, but I didn't understand his fear of abandonment. It took so long to get him to a safe space to tell me, but that just, it gave me a key to how to learn how to communicate with them, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. My goodness. And to get to this place where he can feel safe and share that story, you're probably one of the only people that know about it.
Yeah, anybody reading the book does too, because he said, it's okay, don't make me anonymous. He had come to terms with it. But, honestly, there wasn't a single person I spoke to, Marianne. We're talking about people that I spoke to, again, for a couple of years and got unbelievably deep. There wasn't a single person that didn't say to me at least once, and probably multiple times, oh, okay, I'm going to tell you something, but I never really told anybody. And I mean, how long does it take to build trust with someone to be able to say that? I mean, I'm sure we're all keeping things inside that people don't know about because it's hard. It's hard to let these things out sometimes, but they do affect who we are. And especially when it comes to the trauma of cancer, because there's always that fear that it's going to lead to death. It doesn't even often lead to death, but it can lead to death. It just makes it so much harder to like want to show that vulnerability. And it's like, it's just to be able to be raw and open and honest is such a difficult thing. But I think it's so needed when people are going through something as dramatic as cancer, especially if it's something that, that's serious and that is recurring or could be recurrent. And, it just puts a different perspective on ourselves and gives us, the opportunity or the need to think about things on an existential level.
Let's circle back to your book here for just a minute. I know in your book, you share about how you were supporting and doing a fundraiser for your sister. What was life for you before all that?
Yeah. Now we're going to get into how we don't make always the best decisions. But so, I mean, real quickly, it was a strange, and I didn't know it at the time, really, Marianne, but I've had many opportunities to reflect on it. But in the same very short period of time when my sister told me that she was diagnosed with cancer, and then it was probably likely a terminal cancer, I was right then going through a transition where I said, I'm changing my life. And right before then I just embarked on it. And I said, man, I'm going to go down a new path. I'm overweight. I'm a smoker. I'm stressed out. I'm not healthy. I'm sedentary. I'm not active. I'm I never deal with my problems in the right way. I had come to all of these like realizations, like these aha moments that, man, you're just not living a great life. And most of that is your own doing. And I said, I gotta make a change. I gotta make it better. So I embark on this thing where I go, okay, I'm going to drop the cigarettes. I'm going to start eating healthy. I'm going to stop trying to fix other people's problems and start worrying about my own. And I literally just take the first couple of weeks to starting to get healthy. And I get this call from June and she says, yeah, I'm probably going to die from this cancer. And I'm like, ugh. So she's going down one path that's leading, to the end of her life. And I'm going down another path, which is for me, just beginning my life. And it created this little dichotomy and also some starkness to the importance of us having, kind of deep conversations. So I guess my eyes were opened up to the seriousness of what she was going through, not just because of what I saw it was doing to her, but it just gave it an extra depth because I'm like, man, I have the opportunity to change my life and go down a new path, and people in her situation don't. And it just gave me a deeper level of appreciation for the fact that while we need to take charge of our own lives and live our best lives. And watching her go through what she went through just gave me that thought at a deeper level, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it sure does. I mean, it's such a difficult thing to go through that, and then to be a family member supporting someone who's going through cancer. It's just got to be tough.
Yeah, and I also, felt a little bit guilty because, here I am able to make changes that are going to give me a better life, or that I think are going to be more enlightening and give me another opportunity to have new beginnings and all of this forward-looking, optimistic, positive things. And I was at the same time kind of grabbing life by the horns and saying, okay, I'm gonna take charge, and I'm gonna finally start living on purpose and live a meaningful, self-aware life. And in contrast to what she was going through. So I think it probably made me ultra sensitive on communicating with her in the right way because of that, a little bit of guilt, a little bit of shame. But she was happy to hear about the good things that were going on with me, even in the darkest times of her. I mean, she was getting ready to leave her husband and two young kids behind and still wanted to hear, how my day was going and that I was doing another Ironman or something. And she wanted, she was so happy to see me be so happy. It was really enlightening.
Well, before you started all these Ironman, I mean, it must have been a real transition going from, and I think a lot of people can relate to this. It's like hanging out inside on the couch or what have you, and maybe we've put on a few pounds, to now you're going to do this, massive bike ride.
Yeah. So the bike, well, so so when June was, I don't know, maybe 2.5 or 3 years into her cancer, and just a couple of months before she passed, she said, hey, there's this event going on, and it's like a 24-hour walk around a track, and everybody raises money. And man, I just want to make it so I can make it to that event and watch everybody. Cause, to see everybody out there, showing me love and giving me all this attention and caring so much about me, I really want to watch it. So I want to be out there for the whole 24 hours. And I said to her, Marianne, I go, okay, well, at your condition, if you're going to be out there for 24 hours watching them, I'll go run 24 hours. I'll be on the track the whole 24 hours. And so a couple of days before the event, unfortunately, she passed away, and she didn't get to be there to see everyone. But I did, and I made it the whole 24 hours. And I noticed that kind of connectivity, and it's a little bit of a long answer, so excuse me, but I noticed the connectivity between everybody there, and they were all dealing with their own realities, but they all kind of had the same like quietness around the emotional side of what they were going through. Even the remembrance times in that 24 hours that they do some special remembrance things, they're even done in quiet, right? And so it's like, man, we, around the emotional side. And I said, well, we all seem to be connected by those emotions. So when I came up with the idea for the book and it was starting to take form and I'm talking to people and I realized, wow, we're all connected by trauma and by this difficulty in talking about the emotional side of things and connecting. And I said, oh, what the heck? Why not try to connect all the stories by biking to each one of the people I had been talking to for a couple of years as I'm zigzagging my way across the country. So I feel like the red line of, old timey movies where you have a red line, following you from where, over a map, the red line across the country zigzagging to each one of the book participants was kind of the tie that binded the stories together. Since we're all connected, I wanted to connect all the stories. And so, yeah, I did embark on a 5,000-mile bike ride to kind of raise awareness and to kind of connect the stories and really contemplate on the bike ride the people that I'd spoken to, the grieving over my sister and a few other things.
Was this your first big bike ride when you did this?
No. Well, of that length, yeah, you can't really, well, unless you're some kind of, ridiculous person that has nothing else to do in life. I mean, you can't embark on a 6-week, 5,000-mile bike ride all the time. So no, that one was a new one. I had done like multi-day bike rides. I'd done a ton of Ironmans and 24-hour runs and a bunch of other stuff that over the years, since I stopped smoking and started becoming healthy, I'd done hundreds of endurance events, but nothing like a 5,000-mile bike ride. And I did 4,700 miles in 45 days. So we're talking about well over 100, almost 120 miles a day for more than 6 weeks, day after day after day. It was a brutal experience physically, but a very, very wonderful experience emotionally and psychologically.
So how does June still inspire you today?
That's a very sweet question. Thank you for asking. I don't know. I mean, I feel that every once in a while, let's scratch that. More than every once in a while, fortunately, I get these regular notices, right? I get an email or a book review, or I do a talk and somebody comes and talks to me or whatever, and they seem inspired to want to form a deeper connection. They feel inspired to maybe have a little bit of insight into the human condition. And so they might be better equipped to take something from one of the stories and apply it to a relationship in their life or something, like they're just inspired to say, man, I can form deeper connections and not be afraid. And I guess that's because of June, right? Without her, I wouldn't have embarked on this project. I certainly wouldn't have understand the depths of the thoughts that I mentioned, like that you have no idea what people are gone through, or that people are so isolated or feel so abandoned during times of trauma. And I think that, again, great question. I think without her, I wouldn't have had, I think, such a wonderful impact on people that they feel compelled to say, thank you for showing me this stuff, which is really cool. I mean, I'm just sharing the stories that are in the book, but they're moving stories and they're inspiring stories of real people who've gone through real things. And I think without June, there's no way I would have done any of that.
Well, it's also sharing your story with your sister and everything that not everything, but a lot that you both went through. And I think that it's, very telling. And then to include 15 other stories from people around the country, that must have been just so kind of just heartwarming, because I know you didn't only just talk to cancer patients, you talked to survivors and caregivers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did. In fact, one of the people I spoke to, Marianne, was a 40-year practicing oncologist at NYU. And I wanted a doctor's perspective on what it's like to treat people over a long period of time, what kind of emotional toll that has on you. And then when I found the right person and, that was willing to talk to me at that deep of a level, not only did I discover that, but I discovered a few other things that were just unbelievably moving, and shocking and inspiring. To know that here's this wonderfully successful, happy person, but man, the things she had to overcome, just like we all do, right? Her father abandoned her and her family when she was only like 11 or 12 years old, never to be heard from again, right? I mean, I think, that would have happened to her. And then she told me stories of growing up, trying to be a doctor at a time when women doctors were not taken seriously. In fact, she's one of her peers said, listen, how am I going to give you patients? I can't refer patients to a doctor that has long curly hair. Go see us, go to the salon, get your hair done. I can't give you patients. Imagine a time like that when you're one of the smartest people in your class. You're an unbelievable surgeon, and you're not getting referrals because you have curly hair, because you're a woman with curly hair. I mean,
Wow.
wow, the things she overcame. But her story, without getting into it, because I know we're probably time, her story is absolutely moving to understand how desperate she is, having lived a wonderful, long, beautiful, fulfilling life, how desperate she is, Marianne, to make sure that people take her advice and take her care as seriously as she's given it to them, because she wants to give them what she's been so blessed to have, or help prevent them from not having, what she's had, which is a long, beautiful, fulfilling life. So she's desperate to help people. And it's like, wow, man, to know what our doctors are going through or what they have been through, it's kind of like what we've gone through or been through. Who hasn't been abandoned? Who hasn't had difficulty in their career? I mean, certainly not to her level, maybe. And who can't picture this doctor over all these years is just more and more desperate to help people because she wants to give them what she's had, which is this wonderful, fulfilled life. And it's a very, very moving story. So yeah, there's all kinds of joys in there.
So, how has your journey impacted your own children?
Oh, I'm very lucky. I grew up in a household where kids were not wanted. They certainly weren't loved. And I was very, very much on my own. And so was my sister. She dealt with it better than I did. The second that we were supposed to be out of the house, we were out of the house, never to be heard from again. And so we were alone for our lives. And when I had kids, I said, I purposely said, I just want to do everything the opposite. So I'm very, very close to my kids. In fact, I could tell you a story. Remember that I was telling you when June died, we did that 24-hour run. My kids were 9, if you can imagine. They're twins. My kids were 9 then. And they joined me, Marianne, for that 24 hours. They made it about 21 out of that 24 hours walking around or jogging around the track. At 9 years old, they did like 35 miles or something each, just to be there and support, and the help they gave people and the people that they spoke to. Oh my God, it's including them in this has just been wonderful. And they've always been there. They're super supportive. I have a wonderful open relationship with them, and they have a lot of memories of my sister, not so much from interacting with her, but because we feel comfortable talking about it. And we've applied what we learned from June and from this journey to our lives and to our relationships and to our friends. And so I feel like it's very much alive, and we don't have many areas in our lives that we are not comfortable talking to each other, which again is probably a side benefit of what I went through with June.
Well, I felt that your book, Cycle of Lives, was so impactful, David. I mean, it was so well written and really touched my heart. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about the work you do?
Thanks. I appreciate that. When you're writing stories about people that are in depth as these stories, and they say to you, it's okay if you don't hide my name and my details, like I'm putting myself out there in relation to the fact that most people were telling me things they hadn't told anybody. They said, okay, This is your mission. You want to do it right. I'm going to let you. I mean, it was a very serious endeavor. So these are real stories. They're real moving. They're evocative. And I asked each person, I said, hey, um, do you have a charity? Do you have an organization you feel an affinity to? So I wanted to give, and I continue and will continue to give 100% of the proceeds to the cancer focused organizations that were chosen by the book participants and others like Children's Hospital LA, not completely cancer focused, but one of the book participants was a pediatric oncology nurse there and said, hey, can you give my portion to them? If you want to find out any information, it's cycleoflives.org, or just read the book and hopefully it'll help you.
Well, David, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you for having me, Marianne. It's a very in-depth conversation. You asked me some good questions. I appreciate you making me think.
Well, thank you, David. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Cycle of Lives. So our next special guest today is Ashly Haseotes, and she's here to share with us her new book, The Unspoken, a soul's reflection on healing from abuse, neglect, and chronic pain. So let's welcome to the show, Ashly Haseotes.
Thank you so much, Marianne. I'm so happy to be here.
It's such an honor to have you here and to talk about this book. There's just so much that is so authentic and so in many ways raw. Did you intend to write your book this way?
Oh my goodness. So believe it or not, I actually did not have any intention on writing a book. It really came out of a moment of pure cathartic therapy. I shut my computer down. It was during lockdown. So I was doing therapy over Zoom. And I shut my computer down and I thought, well, I feel like I need to journal out what was, what had just happened in that session. And that's when I realized, well, first of all, I started journaling and then didn't stop for probably, I did 8 hours a day of this kind of free writing. And then I looked down several weeks later and realized I had typed 85,000 words. And I thought, oh boy, this may be helpful to other people. Maybe this should be a book. So that's kind of how it happened.
Well, and you start off the book talking about trauma and how there's so many different phases of trauma. And a lot of times people don't even realize that.
It's so true. I think that the biggest thing I hear from my clients, really from anybody, friends, family, is this statement. And it kind of goes, there's some variation of it, but I had some things that happened in my life, but people have it way worse than me. Or there's, it could be a lot worse. And I think that that's an unfortunate thing for a lot of people because we are missing the importance of our own story. And, and like I say in the book, there's trauma with a capital T and there's trauma with a lowercase t. But honestly, the jolt of energy to our nervous systems, it's the same. And so trauma can happen to anybody and likely has happened to those who are listening.
And I was fascinated how you share that trauma can be something that someone is sharing, they're sharing their trauma story or something that has been witnessed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have been traumatized by even just watching things on TV. But yeah, we can be witnessing somebody else's story and that can be dysregulating to our nervous system. And lots of people don't understand that. I mean, there's a lot of work, in this polyvagal, concept. It's a neuro concept of how our nervous systems are trying to regulate for safety. One of the, concepts of that is that our nervous systems, like right now, my nervous system is regulating with your nervous system because we are in an energy exchange. And so it can be dysregulating for one human to witness and to listen to somebody else talk about their trauma, because it's a hardwired thing that our nervous systems are doing. They are in connection, with our nervous systems of those around us.
It just kind of proves that we are all connected in some way or another. And that connection is something that definitely can be felt.
1,000%. It absolutely can be felt. And, for those, and this is something I find a lot with some of my clients that, don't have trauma with a capital T, like, they weren't abused or neglected in any way, but they do in just casual conversation can describe how their nervous systems were dysregulated because their parents had dysregulated nervous systems. Oh, my dad was really angry, or my mother was very anxious, or, whatever. And when our parents haven't done a good job at taking care of themselves, their dysregulated nervous system affects our nervous systems as children. And so if we're raised by parents who have dysregulated nervous systems, by nature, ours will become dysregulated because it's that coherence effect that we just talked about of how your nervous system is constantly looking out to the nervous systems of those around you to find safety.
It's so interesting. People that live or grow up in chaos don't really realize it until they can either get away from that or make a conscious choice to leave.
Exactly.
So your book, let's just touch on the title here for a minute. The Unspoken. What was that about?
The Unspoken. The book, it's my memoir. So it's my story of healing after what I call a crash and burn. I became debilitated with migraines and vertigo. I had vestibular migraines. So every time I got a migraine, I also got vertigo. And I was bedridden for months, and the putting of myself back together again was very eye-opening for me because, like a lot of the listeners, I never really thought that quote unquote what happened to me was a big deal. And it turns out that it was. It turns out that I had a lot that was unspoken. And that was very dysregulating to my nervous system. And I needed to have my crash and burn in order to put myself back together again. So it's a story of, chronic pain, chronic anxiety, suffering, learning to live with chronic pain, and healing.
It's interesting how things come together. I mean, when you talk about the unspoken, you touched on how just not using your voice. And I found it so fascinating that you really had these premonitions as a child that later became true.
Mm-hmm. I know, isn't that crazy? Yeah. So for the listeners, from the time that I was little, I really kind of daydreamed / fascinated, fantasized rather, about this fairy tale life that I was going to have. And ultimately, I came to this kind of daydream that I used to think about all the time about my husband. He was going to be the best thing that ever happened to me. He was going to save me from this terrible trauma that I was living my whole life. We were going to have this unbreakable love. He was going to get terribly sick, and I was going to will him back to life with my love. Fortunately for my husband, that did not happen to him. But unfortunately for our firstborn child, that's exactly what happened. Our firstborn child, Nicholas, was born subsequently, very shortly after he was born, was diagnosed with cancer. And it was in truly not only my DNA that ultimately helped Nicholas to get better, but certainly my love for him. So yeah, interesting, right?
What a difficult time that must have been. And obviously it's the love that you have for your family that really brought everything back together and brought everyone to wholeness.
Yeah. Interesting, right? The soul is always after love.
One shape or another, right? So when you talk about putting yourself back together, how did you start doing that?
Well, we can't put ourselves back together again, really, until we truly have observed ourselves in the moment of what we all call, I think the healers call the dark night of the soul. So I was at my rock bottom. There was really no other place to go but up. And so I just started to take inventory of my life. And I really kind of display that, I think, in kind of somewhat chronological order in the book. But once I was aware of like, wow, I think I've been through a lot of really heavy traumatic stuff, I then spent time unpacking it. And I found a great therapist who was also specialized in chronic pain, which for me was a big piece of my puzzle. And similarly, I say this to my own clients, like, well, yes, what happened to you is important, but let's start with how you're feeling today. And that was like a breath of fresh air for me, because I knew I had a bunch of stuff in the childhood to work through, but I couldn't get past the fear and the anxiety that I was experiencing in that moment. I couldn't unpack it without first starting with, oh my God, I'm so scared that I'm so broken and so messed up. And I had to start there. So we quickly used journaling as a tool, which now I subsequently teach to my clients. Journaling to my inner child, having a voice for her, was literally life-changing for me.
Yeah, I can understand why so many people are gravitating towards your work, because everyone's got trauma happening that a lot of times it is kind of scary to look at it and go, okay, how am I going to unpack this? And if I do, am I ever going to be the same?
Totally. I actually just had a session this morning with one of my clients who kept saying how overwhelmed she was. I just feel so overwhelmed and I'd rather help other people. It's easier for me to help those around me. Why can't I help myself? And I identified with her, immensely. And ultimately she and I came to also something for her to unpack, which was that she felt like she wanted it to go faster. I just want to be done with this healing thing, she said. And I started laughing and I said, I know. And I think the reason that you want to be so done is because you're afraid of what you're going to uncover, and I think that's a really common thing for us. Like, oh boy, like I kind of want to get better. I know I don't like the way that I feel right now, but if I do this healing work, like, geez, like what am I going to uncover? Like, how bad is it going to be? And am I going to like what I see? And I think the easiest thing, and I tell all my clients this, is you're probably not going to love it at first sight, but ultimately you're going to love yourself anyway, no matter what, because all of the parts that you're afraid of are really just parts of you. They're not the whole you. And, I really feel like that's really one of the ground, foundations of healing, is to love ourselves.
Yeah, it's really bringing together that puzzle that we are missing so we can become that whole person again and enjoying who we are completely, or good or bad, all of it.
Yeah, I think the resistance for whatever it is that we're going through, like for me, where we started with that day that in therapy, she started with, how are you feeling today? And I broke down. I said, I have another headache and I can't live like this anymore. Like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. I can't, like, so many things I can't do with a headache. And that just started me on this path of like, well, what can I do with a headache? And how were these headaches affecting me negatively? And why was that? And why did that feel so big? And I described that moment, in the book, was like, well, I'm being a terrible wife right now. And I'm being a horrible mother. I'm so sick. I can't be there for anybody. And, ultimately that led to feelings of failure, right? That's where that led. Like, well, I was failing. I was failing as a wife. I was failing as a mother. And then we very, gently, she gradually got me to the feelings underneath failure. And, what does that feel like for me to fail? Well, it feels like, well, if I fail, then I'm going to be unlovable. And if I fail, I'm going to be unworthy, and all of these things. And ultimately the under feelings, right? The feelings of being unlovable and unworthiness really came from the neglect and abuse that I experienced by my mom. And once I was able to unpack that, it was like, oh my God, I actually am lovable, even with a headache. And I'm still a great wife, even though I have chronic pain. And I'm still a good mother, even though I can't go to basketball practice because the sound of the ball on the basketball court is too much for my head. And when I was able to get to that moment of, that I'm still a good person, my headaches literally went away like that.
Oh my goodness, that's so remarkable. Having that happen where all of a sudden that's gone. Why do you think the power of your story impacts people so much?
The only answer that I can give is authenticity. I think people trust other people when they're honest and real. And there's this whole Instagram wellness vibe and, thing that's happening. And it can be really overwhelming for people who are first steps in their healing journey, to look at this shiny Instagram world and see everybody who looks perfect. And, they did this diet and they lost all this weight, or they did this healing modality and now they're smiling. And I think that what this shiny Instagram world is missing is the raw authenticity, blood, sweat, tears, snots on the face, moments of, sharing, this is how sick I was, and these are the modalities that I did in order to try to get better. But also, you have to find your own, right? Like, my book is not a how-to book. I never wanted it to be a how-to book. I just feel that by sharing my story, the readers and listeners can say, well, wow, if she can get better, I can get better. And so really it's just there to provide hope for people. All of the feedback that I've gotten, it's life-changing for people. I didn't really expect that, to be totally honest with you. But it is really, really moving for people to say, I found myself on your pages and I feel like it's given me permission to start my journey. Like, that's all I could have ever asked for.
And do you find like people sometimes are waiting for that permission? They're like, someone to give them like, hey, it's okay to, start unpacking this or start getting in a place where you are more in control of just how you're feeling.
100%. And I think that's kind of where we started this conversation, right? It's like people downplay what happened in their life and they're not giving themselves permission to heal. And I think it's a really common thing. People, especially for women, by the way, I think it's really common for women to just downplay what happened, pull up the bootstraps, got to keep going, have a family to raise, got to go to work, do all of these things. And I think that I know that when these women are reading my book, they see me as a regular person, because I'm a totally regular person. I have children, I have a husband, I have 2 jobs. I'm just a regular girl. But I had all these crazy things that happened to me, and I had a crash and burn, and now I put myself back together. So people can identify with, like, I'm not this celebrity on a stage who's, has everything all put together. And I think that helps people to trust me. And I hope it does, because, I felt like by being vulnerable, it would help. And it turns out that I'm right.
You definitely are. We all have bad hair days, So, there's a quote in your book that really struck me. And it says, observation is the key to making meaningful change. We can't change what we don't see. I'd love for you to expand on that.
Yes, I love that quote. It's true, because you can't change what you don't know is happening. Right. So I kind of break it down like this, so if a client comes to me and says, my marriage is falling apart, I'm miserable and I need help. We kind of break it down, right? So give me, the most pertinent thing that happened and how were you feeling in that moment? I don't necessarily care about the details of the argument. I want to know how you're feeling. Where did you feel it in your body? And how did you react to the situation? Did you ignore how you felt? Did you act on your feelings? Or did you use that as an opportunity to learn a little bit more of yourself? And most often we react or we shut down, which are both trauma responses. So when I first started putting myself back together again, I was in observation on purpose, but observation for like months upon months. I couldn't not make any meaningful change because I felt like I was like in a boxing match, right? I would get hit on one cheek and then I would turn around and get hit on the other cheek with triggers. My whole life was triggers and I didn't even realize it. And I never wanted my children to feel that way. So I think my kids are probably, if you were to interview them, would be like, oh my God, my mother and her emotions. I'm so sick of talking about it. But I try to show up to them and own my stuff, because 90% of all arguments we have with our children are truly our own triggers being triggered. And that's why we respond, potentially in a bad way. But yeah, I think that it was really important for me to have my children know that my responses really weren't about them, that they were really about me, and I'm working through some stuff,
Well, I think they have such a head start in life having that kind of an education where, maybe they're going, oh gosh, we're talking about our feelings again, but later on, they're going to appreciate that.
I hope so.
Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about the work you do?
Thank you so much for reading my book, by the way. I really am honored by that. My website is ashleyhaseotes.com. I really, really appreciate it. I had fun. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Ashley. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, The Unspoken. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.